Welcome to Grounded, where we will rely on our shared roots of civility and shared love of our community and country to ground us while we engage in honest, reflective conversations about how we have come to find ourselves in one of the most divided and divisive times in the history of our country. When both major political parties are saying out loud the other threatens our Constitution and our democracy, I think we ought to heed the warning that something is amiss and realize honest dialogue is needed. This dialogue should include, in my opinion, how so much of our division is fueled from well beyond the borders of our beautiful community. And so much of that fuel is misinformation. Misinformation that it's either constructed, embellished, or outright created by private corporations that want to be able to predict and in turn control us as much as they can to serve their interests in power and wealth. I refuse to allow these entities to depict members of my community as others. I refuse to see my neighbors as ignorant MAGA morons or deranged communists. I can say with a lot of confidence that many who live among us to this point may disagree with my assessment of who actually does pose a threat to our country and our community as we have come to know and love it. Many of these people I grew up with. Many of these people include some of the parents who welcomed me into their homes as a child and still would today. Many of these people were either customers on my paper route or customers at Condon's, where I happily served many of them for all of my teenage years and into my young adulthood. Some of these people have for years welcomed me and my family to celebrate special occasions and holidays with their big, beautiful extended families. Many of these people I've come to know through coaching their kids, where I was able to see decency and strong character through the way they cared for their families and friends and contributed where they could to enrich the times we shared. Many of these people coached or taught me or members of my family. Many of these people have been teammates and classmates and are lifelong friends. Many of these people are family. Many of these people have grieved with me when we've lost loved ones. Many of these people are public servants who have dedicated their careers to faithfully serving us all in life-threatening circumstances. I've had to rely on them personally at times, and in all instances, I saw remarkable skill, capabilities, professionalism, and compassion. Many of these people have sacrificed more for our country and in turn for our community than I could ever imagine. I refuse to allow powerful outside forces to manipulate me to the point where I see the people living in my community I've loved for as much as I have for the past 5 decades as others who are threatening to destroy all that we share and have enjoyed about living together as we do both locally and nationally. This program is designed to proceed in a very intentional way, and at a very intentional pace. You see, I don't think the problem we are all facing is a matter of immoral or stupid others. I'm convinced it's actually an information problem, or rather a misinformation problem, that is compounded by the speed at which this false information travels and influences the way we see ourselves, even as we continue to share the same roads, the same beautiful park and ball fields, the same friends and memories, and the same hopes for our children to grow and maintain and enjoy all the rights and freedoms provided to us through our Constitution and our rule of law. Joining me tonight are Whitman's 2 longest-serving Select Board members. Both of these gentlemen have dedicated decades of their lives serving our community in many different capacities. Please join me at home while we welcome Whitman Select Board Chair Kowalski and Whitman Select Board Vice Chair Dan Salvucci. Gentlemen, thank you very much for sitting down with us this evening for a very important discussion about some of the things we should all be aware of as we approach an unprecedented presidential election and contemplate any potential risk leading up to, on the day of, or after November 5th. Dan, Carl, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
And I was hoping I could have maybe each of you say a little bit about your, careers or living in Whitman and kind of different roles you've served and things like that. Maybe Dan, we could start with you.
Want to start with me?
Please.
Not the chair first?
Save the big guns.
I know. My name's Dan Salvucci. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen. Maybe for the last, 10, 12 years, Carl? I've been Vice Chair. I'm also on a lot of boards and committees. I serve as Whitman's representative on South Shore VOTEC. I serve as Whitman's representative for Old Colony Planning Council, Joint Transportation Committee, and I'm a signatory for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which deals with all towns that have a greater population of 15,000. I do the MBTA Advisory Board. I do Plymouth County Advisory Board. I love this town. I've been here since 1977, my wife and I do whatever I can. I spent like 5 years on the Finance Committee. Then I decided to run for selectman, and it's been, I voted for my 8th term, so it's been a while.
Yeah. Thank you.
I came here 5 years before you did.
I know it.
And I came here in 1972. My wife and I were living in Pennsylvania. I was in graduate school, getting an advanced degree in English, and I was a teaching assistant, which meant I didn't make an awful lot of money. And luckily, she was a nurse, and she did okay. However, we became pregnant with a young person who eventually became a classmate of yours at Whitman Hanson, Kristen. And so I had to find a job. And I found one at Massasoit Community College. And I started working there in 1972. And I've worked there ever since. I retired from full-time work in 2009. But I've taught part-time since then. A great place. And a place that was important to Whitman. Actually, a lot of students from Whitman and Hanson went to Massasoit Community College, and I was really proud of that. My first political, I guess if you could call it that, my first political steps in Whitman were I became a member of the Historical Commission. I learned some things about the town there. There was a man on that commission, Russell Gardner, who could trace his ancestry back to the Mayflower,
Right.
and he was a Wampanoag.
Yeah.
An amazing guy. I learned an awful lot from him while on that committee. But then I eventually served on the Whitman School Committee, K through 8, and then moved to the Whitman Hanson School Committee when we regionalized. I was on those committees for 15 years. And took a couple of years off and then joined the selectmen. I think maybe the year before you did. I'm not sure.
You're finishing your 8th term, or you're in the second year of your 8th term.
And I've been there ever since. I love this town.
Yeah.
Town has been a great town for me. I did have a great uncle who was the fire chief in Whitman back in the 1920s, and his name was Bert Dyer. He lived on a house on the corner of Dyer Avenue and South Avenue. So, and I used to remember going to his house as a little kid, but I didn't know much about him then. I didn't know then that he had been the fire chief. But then when I was on the Historical Commission, I'm sitting there looking through a book that we were about to publish about the town, and there was his picture. And I said, "Wow, that's my great uncle. He married my grandfather's sister," and it drew a connection. It drew a connection for me to this town. It was a great place to bring up our 2 kids. Both of them went to Whitman Hanson High School, and it did well by them.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to be involved in local politics here. And the thing that I like about it is, if you look at Dan and I, there are 2 people who probably are this far apart politically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We almost never. On some major issues, we can't possibly agree with each other. However, when we're on the Board of Selectmen, those kinds of politics, party politics, don't play a role at all.
Nope, absolutely.
And the thing about Dan that I've enjoyed working, why I've enjoyed working with him, is he's a guy that I can trust at all times to tell me exactly what he's thinking, to go to follow through on things that he said he's going to do.
Right.
And whether he's a Republican or a Democrat, and whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat, doesn't make any difference whatsoever.
Right. And I can attest that it's always come through, all right? And we are lucky in Whitman to have you both, and
Thank you.
have you both be as integrally involved in our growth and our, evolution as a community as long as you have. And honestly, those are the reasons why I reached out to you, Carl, because I feel like we're in a time and a place that, lots at stake, and I think we could benefit as a community to lean on both of your perspectives over the years to kind of get a feel for where we are now as compared to, where we've been. Maybe look at some of those values that we used to share and aren't being observed at this point, and, just have a genuine kind of conversation about that.
Yeah, we've had we've basically had a mission statement that's been unpublished on the Board of Selectmen. Although we did do a 5-year plan a couple of years ago, and we surveyed the citizens and what kind of things our citizens valued.
Yeah.
And our citizens value education.
Right.
Our citizens value public service, meaning police and fire, and they like their roads plowed in the wintertime.
Makes sense, right?
But they don't want to pay big money for it.
Oh, right.
That's what we know.
Yes.
We know that we try to keep taxes low, but we try to provide excellent services. And I think so far we've been fortunate to have done that. It's getting more difficult as the years go on.
Yes, it is.
It's getting more difficult as the state doesn't supply the schools with as much money as it did when we regionalized.
Yeah, true.
Regionalization actually saved the schools and saved our town when it happened, because there was a lot of incentive money to do that. Some of that money it's not as great as it used to be, which makes it more difficult.
Right.
So we've had difficult times in town lately, but I think we're going to get through it.
Yeah, I do too.
And I appreciate what you did on the school committee too, as an officer on the school committee and as a spokesperson for the schools. Speaking for the schools is one thing. Getting their message through to the townspeople at town meeting and at the ballot box is something else. And it's a job that's difficult sometimes, but somebody has to do it.
Yeah,
And you've done it well.
well, thank you. I do recall the issue we had with statutory method and how contentious that was.
Yeah.
But to your point, Carl, we got through it, and we got through it in a very civil way. There were some moments, but all in all, we plowed through it, and I think we've come out better for it. Some things may be unresolved a little bit, maybe on the other side in Hanson, but
Well, courtesy and civility is important.
Right.
Yeah.
To both of us,
Absolutely.
in the jobs that we do.
Yeah, and to speak on this, when we went to the statutory method, it was quite a task for Hanson to deal with that.
Right.
So we went and helped them by increasing our assessment to the Whitman-Hanson school system to take the pressure off of Hanson until they could catch up the following year.
Yes.
We worked together, the two towns, because we're in a regional agreement.
Yeah.
So it worked out very well,
And as you know, you guys know better than most. You can't please everybody all the time, right? But you do your best to make the best decisions you can for everybody.
Right.
And during tough financial times, our department heads do a great job.
Right.
Remember, Carl, you and I sat in the meeting with all the department heads and explaining what they chose to do to get us through some difficult times. And they did it. They did a great job.
Right.
They kept the town safe in the meantime by doing that.
Right.
They did good.
Yep. And I think through those times, and all of our difficult times, I'm sure, we rely on some of the things I mentioned in the introduction, right? Those bonds we have in our community. We need to remember those and employ those, that trust, that we've developed for each other as long as we've been in this community. And
Yeah, when I say it was a good place to bring up my kids,
Yep.
And as far as the schools are concerned, from the bottom of my heart, I'm glad that I've been living at Whitman for those 50 years.
Sure.
For over those 50 years, because it has been a great community.
Yeah, and I would say the same. Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure you'd agree, Dan. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I've been here since '77. My wife and I moved from Kingston to Whitman. My two youngest boys were twins. One went to Whitman-Hanson and one went to South Shore Tech. That's why I get involved with South Shore Tech. When Lloyd Patrickin, when he passed away, remember Lloyd? They needed someone to cover it.
Yeah.
I would do it when I was chair of the finance committee, so I stood up and said, I'll do it. And how long has it been?
I know.
15 years?
Yeah.
But Tom Hickey says, Danny, please don't leave.
Yeah.
You know, but he's a great guy.
Yeah,
Great
he is.
superintendent.
Dan does an unbelievable amount of work on these different committees.
I was just listening to you listen, Dan. I had no idea you were involved in all those
That's
committees.
just the ones that I elected to, but I mean, you know, I didn't mention Friends of the Park or,
Oh, right.
you know, all the,
Right.
you know, the building committee for the DPW and things, that building committee for the police station.
Yeah.
That's all in-town stuff.
Right.
That's nothing wrong with that.
It's invaluable work, and we appreciate it. We really do.
Yeah, actually, you know, one of the first things I got involved in was with the Whitman Counseling Center when it was first established. There was a problem. The problem. Some kids in the town had problems.
Yeah.
And so we developed a counseling center to deal with that.
Yeah.
And eventually it got taken over by the Brockton Area Multi-Service. They run it now. But the Whitman Counseling Center, to me, showed how much our community cares for everybody that lives here.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And our police and fire, I see that same care. That same care.
For sure.
They don't treat the kids in this town. They don't treat the elderly in this town with any kind of disrespect at all.
No.
They help them out.
For sure.
When they get in trouble, they help them out.
Yeah.
And that's important to me.
Yeah, and I think that's again one of the benefits of living in a small community where most people, you're here long enough, you get to know who's who, and the people watching each other and looking out for each other, and that goes a long way. So I approached you Friday night, Carl, because I wanted to get something off the ground because I felt the pull, I felt the need, right? Because it really does disturb me to hear people talk about members of my community in the way that they do, coming from either side, right? I'm an independent, have been for 30 years, but my loyalty is pretty fierce to my community, if you haven't noticed over the years, right? It bothers me enough to that I wanted to reach out to two of you to help us with a little perspective on some of these issues, and like I said, where we are, and maybe contrast that with where we've been, and see what's going on. And the first issue I wanted to talk about was public safety in terms of the impact that this presidential election has had around the country and in recent times even in a neighboring community, right, where there's some unrest. And maybe there were, maybe you could speak to it better than I could. But I do have concerns, not only leading up to, on the day of, but there's a good chance we could be dealing with this stuff even beyond the election too. So I wanted to give my community members a place to come and sit down and do as we're doing. Spend a little time maybe connecting on some of those bonds that we share to lean on through some discussions that might require some it might be a little difficult, but I think they're needed. So I don't know if you guys wanted to speak to that issue we had in Hanson recently, and give us any insight on that. And
yeah, well, I certainly hope that people can take what we've experienced recently with a balanced outlook. There were, I mentioned this at a selectmen's meeting a week ago, I think, that there were some things that, three things in particular concerned me that happened. One was there was a report of, through our police department, of a swastika being placed someplace. Yeah. And they took care of that. I have the utmost faith, and you asked about public safety. I have the utmost faith in our police department responding quickly and with confidence in anything that may happen. And I'm not thinking anything's going to happen, but they do that.
Yeah.
They also there also were false reports, and this is this information that you're talking about, that there were illegal immigrants living in the armory.
Right.
That was just struck me as being silly. But there were reports, and we were quickly told by our fire chief and by our police chief that no, that's not happening. There's not going on there.
Right.
There's nothing at all. But that was out there.
Right.
That was happening.
Yep.
One of the things that concerns me sometimes is whenever I think of the Statue of Liberty and what that means, that sometimes people forget that.
I agree.
And they treat people who immigrate to this country with not the kind of respect that my ancestors had when they came.
Yeah.
My Polish grandfather snuck over on a boat during World War I from Poland.
Right.
And he ended up in Brockton.
Yep.
In Little Lithuania with some of his Lithuanian friends, and he ended up working in a box. He snuck over in a box on a boat, and he ended up working at the Lott Phillips box factory in Hanover all of his life. Yeah. And brought up by my father and his two sisters, and his marriage was arranged to a Polish woman from New Jersey. So he came over World War I, immigrant World War I. The Irish side of me came over during the potato famine in the 1860s.
Right.
If it weren't for the spirit of the Statue of Liberty, my family wouldn't be here.
Right.
That spirit that welcomes people.
Right.
Give me, you're tired, you're poor.
Yep.
We seem to, in some ways, we seem to have lost that. We have lost that idea that we welcome people who are struggling. So anyway, so the whole idea of that illegal immigrants defacing and living in the armory was just drove me a little bit nuts. So that bothered me. The swastika bothered me, and then what happened in Hanson around the projection on the water tower. Not necessarily the projection that would bother me, even though it was against the law.
Right.
Was what happened to the town administrator in Hanson when she enforced the law.
Right.
And what happened was that she ended up having to call our chief of police and asking him to have his department protect her street more than normal, have patrols going by, because she had received death threats.
Yep. See, this is one of the main reasons.
Now
why
our police are good at that.
Oh, for sure.
She went to the police chief, and he arranged for that.
Right.
I remember years ago when I moved to Whitman, my wife worked for her job after Chrissy grew up a little bit. She went back to work full time, and her job was with the Catholic Charities detox in Brockton. She was the supervisory nurse of the detox. And there were some rough characters that would come to the detox, in trouble.
Sure.
And it was her, and she devoted her life to helping them.
Right.
There was a police chief here at the time by the name of Travers.
Yep.
He was the fire chief's father.
Right.
And he made sure that our little house in Whitman had somebody drive by it every once in a while to make sure that my wife was safe. I'll never forget that.
Right.
Never forget that overture.
Right.
He didn't have to do that.
Right.
But he knew it was necessary.
Yeah. And again,
So as far as the safety of this town is concerned, I don't have any doubts that we'll be able to handle whatever happens.
Right.
I don't suspect we're going to have.
No,
issues.
I think the police chief will be on top of it. He knows he knows what might be going on, a possibility, and he'll have it covered. because we have police in front of the polling area.
Yeah.
2 of them. We
Yeah.
have a couple inside.
Right.
I just wish that people would slow down as they went by the town hall.
Yeah.
You know, instead of doing 30 miles an hour, 25, maybe, you know, you get people crossing.
Yeah.
You know, maybe 10 or 15 would be better, but
Yeah.
that's just me.
Right.
But one thing, Kyle you and I are going to disagree on is immigration. My parents, my grandparents, they came over from Italy,
Right.
and they came over legally, right? I had a friend of mine whose father's brother lived in Italy. He came over to the United States. He had to work for a year to establish residency,
Right.
and his brother happened to own his landscaping company, so the 2 brothers worked together, and after the end of a year, he called for his son, his wife, and their twin boys. Twin boys couldn't speak English. I had to take them to middle school to tell, you know, what they were trying to say, you know?
Yeah.
Them days I could speak fluent Italian, but you don't do it for 30 years, you forget it. But anyways, but they did it legally, and they got their citizenship. I can understand.
My
if-
grandfather wasn't an illegal immigrant, by the way. He was just an
Right.
immigrant.
But I can understand the fear of living in your country and coming to some place where it's free. But I know my grandfather, when he came over, right, and he got established, he found himself a job right away and worked to own a Jenny gas station,
Yeah.
you know, and stuff like that. And worked, you know, built a company and stuff like that. So if things are done legally, I have no problem with it. It's illegally that I have an issue with. And to get them and then send them back to their country, I don't know what else you can do. I mean, we have the issue where a lot of them are living in Rockland in the hotel, and Rockland has issues, right? We don't have hotels in Whitman, so we don't have any place to store them if the governor wanted to. And I'm quite curious, and I don't know the facts, if the Rockland Board of Selectmen, the Select Board, the new termination for it, did they authorize it, or did the governor say, you will do this? I don't know.
Yep.
You know, he couldn't, and we wouldn't have that decision to make because we don't have a hotel.
Sure.
You know,
Right.
But I mean, I don't like somebody being forced to do something that they feel that is not right for their town, but they're forced to do it.
Yeah. So, on the subject of immigration, I think we could probably go on and on for
Oh, yeah.
some time. And I think there are a lot of extenuating factors and circumstances that would motivate someone, let's say, to walk from Guatemala
Amazing.
to you know, the Texas border. Like, would someone from a healthy community, you know, make that trek and risk their lives, right? And then we could think about, well, why is places like in South America and
Yeah.
Central America struggling as much as they have? And did we play a role in that at all? You know, those are questions we could ask, right?
Interesting. That's an
Major
interesting theory, yeah.
industries, and
All right.
I would recommend reading the book on the Dulles brothers, Dulles International Airport, where one Dulles brother was the Secretary of Defense and the other was the Director of the CIA through the Cold War, and we could talk about the ramifications of some of the decisions and policies they implemented, right? So we could go down that road, but I'd rather, you know, take this time to reassure citizens that the police are on it so that people don't feel intimidated or concerned. And I agree with you, we have, you know, the best as far as I'm concerned, and I mentioned in my introduction, I've seen those public servants firsthand, you know, in instances when you know, I had to call, and like I said, nothing but professionalism and
Right.
amazing capabilities and compassion, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted you both here was to help reassure the public that these things are, whether, you know,
I have the utmost
issues
faith
are on,
in this
right?
department.
I will say though, Carl, what they know, they can deal with. What they don't know is obviously presents a challenge, right?
Right.
And you know, in what era would we ever have had someone saying that there were immigrants living in our armory other than this one, right? And that's my contention. I think a lot of this stuff is coming from outside and influencing the citizens here to the point where we are at such odds with one another that we're dealing with things like that, right? And I want to bring that up because I think we're capable of getting through it, but at the same time, I do think it's important to understand the threat that's out there, right? And you know, these threats aren't isolated. They're happening all across the country, where we have election workers being harassed and sometimes their lives being changed, you know, forever, right? And so I think it's important to consider the context of this presidential election and some of the rhetoric that's being used, and could that motivate anybody in our community to do something that we wouldn't want them to do? We don't know, but I think it's important to discuss it, be aware of it, and reassure the public that our public safety officials are on top of it, and we want everyone to be as informed as possible when they vote and make sure that they're safe and they feel comfortable at the same time. So definitely appreciate that. Yeah, and again, that leads us to my next one is trust in our election process, right? The only other time I can think when the election process was at issue, maybe it was was the hanging chads in Copa County, Florida or something, right? I think that might have been the only
1999.
time. Okay, and that was, you know, not everybody was happy with the outcome of that, how that was handled, but it was handled quickly. And I think that those involved at the highest level recognized what was at stake, and you know, one of the candidates stepped aside, right, and in the best interest of the country, right, because he probably saw that it was going to be a long, protracted battle. I mean, I'm sure they could have presented a pretty significant legal challenge, and he could have gone that road, which would have bled in past January, you know, and into the coming months, and we would have been in a completely different situation.
Right.
So I think, you know, like I said, I'd just like to kind of talk through this because, you know, where our election process by the election officials have been found to be the best and most secure they've ever been, but yet we have a large segment of our population, half in this country, that support a candidate that, you know, regularly, you know, undercuts the credibility of our election process. So, you know, again, with the speed with which this information travels, it's hard to stay ahead of it, right? So it does have an impact. It has a local impact, as we've seen, because we have a very, you know, strong contingent of supporters for a candidate, like I said, that's actively and knowingly trying to, you know, inject some distrust, I think, in the process, and that's unnerving to me. And I was curious to get your take on that.
Well, I know in our town, they are terrific. The fact is that they're only voting in one area, which is a lot better than some areas that have 4 and 5 places that you could vote.
Yeah.
I know we have early voting and absentee ballot voting, right? And that's taken care of right on it. Now, all the times I've run, I've been challenged twice. Once, the first time I ran, I won by 1 vote, and that was challenged. And the funny part about it is my brother, who now lives in Florida, was on my board committee to look at the ballots as they count them in one of the precincts. And in one of the ballots, they had written my name, erased it, and written my opponent's name, UP Scott Benton, right, police chief. And so that they didn't erase it enough, but it was obvious that they changed their mind and they wanted that ballot to go to Scott. So what happened is it gave us a tie. So we had a re-election and I won. People assumed I was going to win at that time because I was on the finance committee.
Yeah.
The last time, or 2 times ago, a couple of times ago, I won by 6 and the person challenged it. And again, there was somebody that erased one and put it the other, and it went from my opponent to me, so I won by 7. But when they had the recounts, they had a long table with all the different precincts. They had somebody watching from each, like if I had two people,
Yeah.
and my opponent had two people, watching them as they counted them and agreed or disagreed. We had our town lawyer. Unbelievable what they did by the law.
Yeah.
And the town of Whitman is outstanding by getting that done.
No question about it.
Right, and I have a lot of faith. But unfortunately, you have areas that are too headstrong about certain areas. Instead of just saying, look, whether you agree or disagree, or whether you pick one person over the other, it's your vote. Go in and voice your opinion by voting. That simple. Don't badmouth the other one. I'm not voting for this one because of this, or vice versa. No, right? I mean, I don't vote with everybody. Like my wife, I don't know who she votes for. I don't ask her. Right? I don't ask her.
Right.
And she's unenrolled.
Yeah.
Right? And if she voted against somebody that I didn't vote for, that's her vote. I don't say, why the heck did you do that? No. It's her right.
For sure.
Yep. And it's just being respectful in all areas, and let's get the job done. And if it's done right and legally, then that's the end of it, and go with it.
Yeah, so I mean, would you guys be, like, again, my intention here is to reassure people, right? Reassure people in our public safety, reassure people in our election process, reassure, and I'll get to this in a minute, our rule of law, right? So if things are adjudicated in a judicial process, then if we have the respect that we've always had for our rule of law, we should observe that, right?
Yeah.
We should recognize that. So would you both be willing to say that the last presidential election there was no determinative fraud, and that Biden won? Is that,
I think that's been
reach for
proven.
either
That's
of you?
been proven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been proven over and over again.
right? Like 60
I was
something.
interesting. And you brought up 1999, the 2000 election.
Yeah.
I was living in Austin, Texas for that fall semester. I took a sabbatical and went to the University of Texas for a semester. So I was living there during the campaign, during the Bush Gore campaign.
Yeah.
The Austin American Statesman, which was the local newspaper, did not endorse Governor Bush, who lived, like in the town.
Right.
In the town. That didn't cause a problem to either to Governor Bush. I mean, he wasn't angry or anything
Right.
like either to Governor Bush or to anybody else.
Yeah.
There was a respect for the newspaper. There was a respect for the governor.
Yeah.
There was eventually there was a respect for what happened in that election, and there was a peaceful transfer of power,
Right.
even though it was kind of complicated.
Right.
We're not seeing that all over the place today.
Yes.
We're seeing the media disrespected, and that's not good.
Right.
That's not good.
Yeah. Dan, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, as far as the media is concerned, I think the media, I mean, especially the news channels, they should be reporting the news and the news only. They shouldn't be leaning towards one candidate or the other like we have. I think that they need to show respect for everyone. And
Do you think it would be a reasonable thing to ask the news outlets to speak to the fact that the 2020 election has been adjudicated and decided, and that there was no determinative fraud?
well, I mean, there's always suspicions of something happening, or they say certain
interesting that you
areas
say that, yeah.
of proof.
Right, always suspicions, yeah.
Right, and whether or not, I mean, how do they determine that? I mean,
I could tell you that, for instance, I believe his name was Chris Krebs. He was a gentleman hired by Trump's administration to take a hard look at all the voting rolls, right, and see who was eligible and whatnot. And this is before the 2020 election. This was leading up to, right? So he was appointed by Trump. He came out after the election and publicly said it was the most secure in history, and he was eventually dismissed, right? So what I'm trying to say is, I think, in my opinion, that simple situation that we have of not being able to come to terms on whether or not there was fraud in the 2020 election that would have changed the outcome of the election, that seems to me to be a pretty rudimentary piece to this process that would set us on a path of eliminating some of these potential risks, right?
Yeah, I think it's the responsibility of every state's election areas, cities and towns, to make sure their area, their responsibility is held legally.
Yeah.
Right? And that, and it's done properly. And then if that's the case, there should be no decision. Yes, this person won or this person won. It's that simple. Just accept it.
Could you say that for our community, Dan, to who won
When,
2020?
well, apparently Trump lost. So
But how do you feel comfortable in saying that, though?
I still have some doubts.
But I'm saying, like, my point is, it's a federal election.
Yeah.
So there are federal guidelines that
Right.
dictate how they should be executed, right?
Yeah.
We've been through that process. We've had, like I said, Chris Krebs, who was appointed by Trump, determined it was the safest election in history. So if we have that in one hand, and we have some doubt and some reservations in the other, help me square that.
See, what I didn't like is when President Trump ran against
Hillary?
Hillary, thank you, Hillary, right? And he won. It was accepted. But then I found that the Senate spent 4 years of trying to dig up some type of legal ridicule against Trump because he won. Instead of doing what they are elected to do to help our United States, both Congress and the Senate, they spent most of their time trying to get whatever on President Trump.
So,
Why
again,
would they do that? Why would you waste
well,
taxpayers'
I think
money?
I might be able to answer that. That, to me, sounds like politics, national politics, as long as I've ever followed it. And I followed it closely for 30 years.
Right.
I'm not talking about the normal politics where they bend the truth and they have their own agendas and they're trying to get reelected. We know that's going to happen. But when we're talking about something as fundamental as the trust in our presidential elections and the rule of law, like I said, all this stuff has been adjudicated already. So where is it that we can't? Why is it that we can't come to terms on that? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, let me ask you a question then.
Sure.
Why would the Senate and Congress spend 4 years of trying to dig up anything they can to put Trump in jail?
Because
That means that they didn't accept the outcome of the election, or they were very upset of the outcome of the election and was quite surprised. And as far as I'm concerned, by doing that, they wasted taxpayers' money.
Okay, so I'm going to steer clear of that type of opinion, and
Okay.
I will do that because it's hard to substantiate that.
Right, exactly.
So what I'd like to deal with is the facts that can be verified, right? And that we have Stephen with us in case we come to an impasse on that. But again, the fact is, the election was determined. Chris Krebs, Trump-appointed person in charge of making sure they were free and fair, publicly stated it was the safest in history. Why are we here now? It's a bit of a rhetorical question, right? And my contention is, it's because of those same influences I referenced earlier that are disseminating this misinformation at a speed that our democracy and our rule of law can't keep up with.
Right.
So I would like to rely on members of my community to ensure that the people in my community are most accurately informed when they go to the polls and can make a decision based on facts.
That's right.
So that's why I asked you if you could,
Yeah.
kind of confirm what, every 60 of the 61, I think, court cases proved that there was no outcome determinative
Right.
fraud. Right.
Yeah,
So
and
I
that's-
think
and
that's like a baseline that we can.
It is. That's a baseline, and that's over.
Right.
It's over. What we have to be concerned about.
Is it?
Well,
Is it? And if it's
what we have to be concerned about is what's going to happen
that's right.
next week.
And what I'm getting at, Carl, is a lot of these things that we saw happen last week are a result of what I'm talking about. That distrust. These people are angry for a reason, right? A lot of these people have been left behind economically by some of these policies that go back as far as NAFTA, right? When we lost our manufacturing. A lot of these people in the Rust Belt, right, that are feeling the decade-long, just that no one's paying attention to them, right? They're watching their communities deteriorate, and as you would, and I would, if that was me, I'd probably want to do something about it, right? So a lot of these people, I feel like there's some legitimate concerns that they should be concerned about. But when you couple those legitimate concerns with this lawlessness, right? Because that's
Right.
how I see it. I don't know if you disagree. It's lawlessness to suggest that there was some type of fraud that we should all be aware of or something. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I think it's not it's counterproductive for anyone to ignore that truth. I think it's plants those seeds that we
No, and we do have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Next week, we have to worry about what's going to happen. What's going to happen if one candidate wins and the other candidate doesn't, and the other candidate wants to sow doubt.
That's right, and we
And
know
they-
that that's happening already.
We know but we know
Right.
that what's going to happen in town hall next week is going to go fine.
Absolutely.
We know that.
Absolutely.
If
Yeah.
every community in the country
Yep.
could say that,
Right.
that's great.
Yep.
And they should be able to say that.
Right.
It sounds like they're going to be able to say that.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
But I mean.
But I understand exactly where you're going, and I have some of the same
Yep.
anxieties myself.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, the point of having you guys with us today, and hopefully I'll have other members of our community, is to just come to those basic. Like I'm not here to discuss policy. I think I don't think there's a place in that in local government. I wouldn't normally ask either of you to identify as a Democrat or Republican, because I don't think there's really a place for that in our local politics.
Well, I get a red shirt on.
It's
you get a blue
changed.
shirt on.
Carl, you'll snuck that in, huh?
That's actually maroon.
I know
It's
that,
not
but
really
I don't have a red shirt. This is the closest.
I will say, though, I appreciate the fact that you have said that you're a Democrat and you're a Republican, to just give people a little bit of, peace of mind that we have responsible individuals like yourself who have served this community for as long as you have, and are willing to just tell the truth. Really, that's all it comes down to.
My mother is an Irish woman from Massachusetts. I had to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
Now, interesting story. Well, quick story. My father and my mother voted Democrat in every president and every election, except one. My father went to bed in 1948 crowing because he voted for Dewey, and he knew that he would win.
Right.
It was the only time he didn't vote Democrat his whole life, and he went to bed. He went to bed saying to my mom, and she won.
Yeah.
Because Truman was elected.
I never asked my wife who she voted for.
Well,
Not even. The only thing I asked her is, "I hope you voted for me." In town elections.
Well, again, I do appreciate you guys sharing your perspective on this, because I think it's really important for our community. And that your last comment, Carl, kind of leads me into the next one. And the rule of law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what happens to us on the other end of these national figures, right? Undermining our rule of law, right? In a pretty brazen way, right? Talking about deporting people and bringing in the National Guard and maybe
The military to arrest people.
To arrest citizens,
I know.
right? Like, what is that? What does that do to these local communities? And that's I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the potential, of these just the total disregard for for our norms, right? Because we all know we have the balance of powers, and they're in, we have the Constitution, all that, but we also have these norms, right? That they're in decorum that is so important to how we interact and how we maintain, the rule of law and commitment to the process.
Actually, the beauty of local government is that.
Interesting you should say that. I think I know where you're going.
Those politics
Right.
don't come into play.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to.
It doesn't.
But I'm telling you, let me throw this at you.
Okay.
I would have, if this was 1999, I probably would have said, yeah, we're a little bit of a buffer there, right? But I'll share this as a parent, okay?
Okay.
As a parent, I feel like my generation fell asleep at the wheel when it came to the internet and the exposure that our children had to it, right?
That's a whole.
And now, and you think
that's
of
a long discussion.
but hold on a second. My kids, my oldest is 25, and my next one's 24. So, take 10 years, 15 and 14, right? My kids aren't thinking a lot about national politics and stuff in that age, but they do know, that there's like a certain candidate running for office, and then he becomes president as they go through high school, and then it's like. So, what I'm saying is, there's a certain tenor. And there's and given the speed of the internet, like I said, and how this misinformation swirls around, that you and I, and Dan, we didn't experience that growing up. So we feel the buffer, but I don't know that our younger generation does. I think they're tapped in more than we realize they are. Therefore, I think the potential threat and the impact of things like a major, presidential candidate brazenly undermining the rule of law. Like that has a significant impact on our community. That's my contention. And I'd be interested in hearing someone dissuade me and tell me that, it's nothing to worry about.
I'm afraid I can't say it's nothing to worry about.
Right.
I can't say it.
Right.
I'm anxious to.
Yeah, right. And that's just the point. I mean, I just want to have these kind of open conversations so that we can put some people at ease a little bit and feel better about, and maybe bring some people back to the table that have left and given up on our process and our engagement with each other,
Unfortunately, with the internet and computers and things, I mean,
But that's how we combat it locally, by having leaders like yourself come and speak out. That's what I believe. That's a way, and that gets to my next one, right? Like, what does it mean to be patriotic? What are we trying to protect? What do we value?
it's funny.
Right. And where do we play a role in that?
Right. I agree with you. I mean, the right to speak is a right, but it has to be respectful. If you disagree, like if you say something I disagree with you.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second, and I apologize. We have, the First Amendment gives us a right to speak.
Right.
It doesn't say we have to do it respectfully.
True.
So there you're talking about a norm that supports the First Amendment, right? It doesn't clarify anything, but it gives it a little support, right? When that goes away, the decency goes away and it's eroded, then I think we start to have more problems than we're accustomed to.
Well, I think as long as, we could disagree.
Yeah.
But I think if it's done respectfully,
Yeah.
it's a difference.
I agree.
But I think it's the way we were brought up in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah. 70s, yeah.
It's the way it is, but to be totally respectful.
Yeah, we try.
To not like something and then all of a sudden, because you don't like it, start throwing bricks through windows is wrong.
Of course.
Right? And I can't ever see that happening in the town of Whitman. I don't think our police and fire and DPW would allow that. And I don't think the people would do that. Except for, I don't know why, like when Kyle mentioned about the swastikas, which was painted very bad, so they didn't do it the right way. That means they need to take a history class or something. But anyways, why would they do that? Did they do that as a joke?
Yeah, so
were they
again,
really
I think we
angry people?
Yeah, I do think there's a real anger out there. I'm not sure, I don't know. The people I'm talking about aren't, even with all their anger of being left behind economically, I don't think that those are the kind of people I'm talking about that are writing swastikas anywhere. I think there's a certain segment of our society that's a little deranged, that have been there for as long as we've been around and will continue to be that way, and we have to figure out a way to deal with those people. And to your point, Carl, I have the utmost confidence in our public safety officials to do that. So that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, the people that like I said, I grew up with, I played sports with, I served at Condon's, whatever. These are the people. I went to a 100th birthday party a couple weeks ago, and I got to sit down with people that when I worked at Condon's, they all were patrons, and they came in. And some of these people I hadn't seen in decades, and what a blast it was to reconnect with some of these people.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, many of those people in me would be on opposite sides of this discussion right now. Right? I know that. I don't want to let that. I don't want to let these outside forces continue to divide our community. And that's why I call on people like yourself, and that's why I'm trying to step up and use my voice to hopefully bring people back together and remember what we are about as a community, right? But getting back to that patriotic, the idea of what's patriotic, like is it the size of the flag in the back of the truck? Like, is that how we measure our patriotism? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
No, it's what the
free
flag-
speech is free speech.
Yeah, but you can't yell fire in a crowded room.
Right.
There are limitations to free speech.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And that's the part
But
of it.
Puts others in danger.
But what I mean is, those flags are expression of patriotism. Are they not?
In the back of a truck?
Yeah, you see them riding around town, the flags. A flag is patriotic, no?
Right.
So I applaud anyone that wants to express their patriotism. What I'm trying to say is, there are some things in our country right now that are under attack, right? Our rule of law, we talked about that. Our election process, we talked about that, right? But both sides are saying that our democracy is in peril, right? So if that's the case,
That's right.
what are we doing individually and as a community to be patriotic? And what I'm getting at is, I think the most patriotic thing we can do in this moment is have these kind of honest conversations where we can land on facts, reassure the community, and move forward in the most intelligent way we can.
I agree with you.
Now, are you saying that flags that are flown, like a truck drives down the street, got a couple of flags?
I was being a little facetious.
I know that, but that's not, I don't wouldn't consider that disrespectful.
Oh, I wouldn't either.
You know, I
not
mean,
at
it's
all.
not
No,
on a
no,
flagpole.
no. Hold on.
Okay.
Nope. Never, ever did I intend to make my point in being a little snarky in saying that. I think there are other ways to measure our patriotism other than that.
Yeah.
And I see that as a pretty prominent, display of patriotism. I would challenge, people to consider not only that, because God bless them, First Amendment, fly your flag. But not only that, maybe we can come together in other ways to ensure that, our democracy and, our Constitution prevail through this time, right? That's where I'm going with that. And I'd like to lean on members of our community to come and sit down and have these conversations, just to give people that peace of mind and that assurance that we're gonna get through this just fine.
Now, there's lots of incidences where they're trying to eliminate things in the Constitution that have been there for years, like the right to bear arms, right? They're trying to eliminate that.
Okay,
Take guns away.
Well, again, I think we're dipping down the policy road here, Dan, but the question isn't whether or not the Constitution can be changed, because of course it can be, right? There's a set process to do that.
Exactly.
My point is, when we start to do things outside of that,
Right, exactly.
extrajudicial kind of things, right, where we're not following what we all claim to value so much.
Yep.
And it seems to me that the ones that are pushing it the most are the ones who feel aggrieved, right? So they're willing to sacrifice what we all, and people before us have served and died for because of their grievances. Grievances are okay, but they need to be done within the structure that we have that makes sure that we get to continue to vote in a democracy. So that's what I'm saying.
Right, you
There's
can't
a
make it
process.
personal.
It's not personal. You can't do it outside the bounds of the Constitution and our rule of law. So as long as we stay within those, I think we're going to be just fine. But I think we have to be vigilant and understand the impact, like I was saying before, about these outside forces and what the impact is in our community. Because I'm interested in maintaining and preserving the values that the three of us have felt over the years and want to maintain. So I think that might be a good place to wind down. And
I'll tell you a funny story.
Oh, sure,
though.
please.
Yeah, when Kyle was up for re-election.
Funny story, yeah.
Kyle
Now
was up
you're
for
on.
re-election.
It's got to be
right?
funny, Dan.
No, I'll tell you why it's funny. Like on Election Day, the Republicans have their own little tent,
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
Democrats are up the other end, the other side of town. Kyle was on vacation on Election Day, and I says, "Give me a bunch of signs," and we were holding Kyle's sign for re-election. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You know why? It's non-political. We vote for the best person for the job, and we felt that Kyle was that person,
Yeah.
and that's what we did. So I mean,
I would, again, people have a right to congregate and express their wherever they want, right? But I'd love to see it if we didn't have those encampments. Maybe we could just kind of spread out and talk to one another and stand next to one another. And maybe we could talk about why we're supporting candidates rather than isolating ourselves across the street, right?
I guess it's all in there.
That's
Just
a good
a thought.
That's a good
Well,
thought.
I think the Democrats like a cup of coffee. That's why they're all by Dunkin' Donuts.
Is that what it is?
We like pizza, so we're in front of Venus.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, listen, I really do appreciate you guys coming on. I know it's, like I said, they're pretty unprecedented at times, and emotions are running high. And I think that's, we're lucky to have you both to have served us as long as you have, and come in here and sit down as voices of reason to reassure our citizens that the elections are going to be safe, and we're going
they
to
are.
continue to respect our rule of law, and we're going to.
And thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah.
No, I
Thank you for
appreciate it.
bringing it up. This is a great idea.
I will continue to do these programs because I do think it's important to hear from members of our community from all walks of life, right? So again, I appreciate you both for coming, sitting with us, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay.